Section 2 of Pantheisticon. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Pantheisticon by John Toland. Of the Ancient and Modern Societies of the Learned. Sections 6 to 9. Read by Anna Simon. 6. Thought, which we must not omit speaking of, is a peculiar motion of the brain, the proper organ of this faculty, or rather a certain part of the brain, continued in the spinal marrow, and in the nerves with their membranes, constitutes the principal seat of the soul, and performs the motion both of thought and sensation, which vary wonderfully according to the different structure of the brain in all kinds of animals. As to other movements of the body, performed by the means of the nerves, we undertake not here to speak of them. The ethereal fire environing all things, and therefore supreme, permeating all things, and therefore intimate, of which a kitchen fire is a certain analogical and imperfect similitude. The ether, I say, by a wonderful structure of the brain thereunto adjusted, and by exterior objects that act on the brain, through the means of the nerves of the senses, and excite therein various imaginations, duly executes all the machinery of conception, imagination, remembrance, amplification, and diminution of ideas. It is this fire alone, more fleet than thought itself, and by far more subtle than any other kind of matter, which can with so quick a motion run over the tended cords and ligaments of the nerves, and variously agitate them, according to the different impressions of objects upon the nerves. What is more, the ether is a reviving fire, infusing a sweet and gentle warmth, not burning, not dissipating, not consuming as ordinary fire. It rules all things, says the author of the treatise upon diet. It disposes of all things according to nature, without noise, and imperceptible either to the sight or touch. In it is soul, mind, prudence, encrease, motion, diminution, alteration, sleep, watching. It governs all in all things, and never suffers celestial and terrestrial beings to be at rest. This fire is Horace's particle of divine breath, and Virgil's inwardly nourishing spirit, heavenly origin, fiery vigour, and if there be any other name which he uses to express it, the animal spirits of the moderns and their liquidity of nerves are but empty titles, unless they denote this fire. Now by what means imaginations are excited, or ideas formed in the brain, which organ, as it is corporeal and very complex, it can produce nothing but what is corporeal, we made to appear in our second book of Esoterics, where we demonstrated that all ideas whatsoever are corporeal. Wherefore, rejecting the notions of some who figure to themselves the diaphragm to be the seat of the soul, or the heart, or liver, or other parts, it behoves men to know, says Hippocrates, or rather Democritus, in that valuable treatise upon the falling sickness, that no other part but the brain affords us pleasures, as mirth, laughter, diversion, and, on the other hand, grief, anxiety, sadness, and mourning. But it means we become wise, and understand, and see, and hear, and know what's base and honest, good and bad, agreeable and disagreeable, discerning some of them by rule, and perceiving others by the advantage that is annexed to them. By the same, in their proper times, we distinguish pleasures from what are not so, and the same things please us not always. By the same we grow delirious and run mad, we nurse terrors and fears, some haunting us by night, others by day, our thoughts are taken up with dreams, we give into unseasonable errors, we are possessed by empty cares, we are ignorant of standers by, and we fall into a disuse and forgetfulness of things. All this is occasioned by the brain, when it is not in its due position, that is to say, when it is not sound, but is hotter or colder, moister or drier, or, in fine, suffers anything contrary to what is natural or usual. The tongue is not more the organ of the taste than the brain is that of thought. But let our discourse return to the place from whence it had digressed. 7. The seeds of all things, begun from an eternal time, are composed out of the first bodies or most simple principles, the four commonly received elements being neither simple nor sufficient. For in an infinity all things are infinite, nay, even eternal, as nothing could be made out of nothing, and therefore we may conclude that the organic structure of seeds could not be formed out of any concourse of atoms or any species of motion whatsoever. To illustrate this tenet by some example or other, the seed of a tree is not alone in power a tree, according to the notion of Aristotle, but a real tree in which are all the integrant parts of a tree, though so minute as not to be perceived by the senses without microscopes, and not even then, but in a very few things. All that this tree wants is a fuller distinction and magnitude of parts, which is gradually acquired by the application of simple bodies of distinct species, that are, as so many constituent parts, necessary to the nourishment and increase of that simple body. Therefore no species of trees perishes, inasmuch as the seeds in which it lives always remain alive, and should they be received in a proper place, forthwith they imbibe a more distinct conformation, nutrition, augmentation, and by degrees arrive at a due perfection. The same may be said of the other species of the universe, not only of animals and trees, but also of stones, minerals, and metals, which are not less vegetable and organic, having their own seeds, formed in their own matrix, and increasing with a peculiar nutriment, as well as men, quadrupeds, reptiles, birds, fishes, and plants. 8. 'Tis true, philosophers for the most part are of opinion that gold, crystal, etc., are similar, or bodies of like nature and parts, made up of an external apposition, or any other way, because they appear so to the senses. But the Pantheists think that they consist of dissimilar parts, from whose comprehension, this or that having the ascendant as a principle of composition, arises the body called homomeres. There is no such thing to be met with as a similar mixed body, no, not even in metals and stones, for chemists demonstrate that such bodies are cemented by a manifold growing together of several substances; for which reason, from gold, than which nothing seems to be more similar, they extract sulphur, quicksilver, earth, and other things, that go to the composition of this noble metal, though not all things, as this would exceed the bounds of human industry. In stones and metals we may behold sundry shapes of veins, such as the shoots, as it were, of branches and roots, spread far and wide, which they have in their mines and quarries, from whence, to appropriate to myself the words of a certain philosopher, a friendly element gently filtrates, first through passages more lax, afterwards gradually through more narrow ones, to refine and make purer the nutriment, and finally an exhalation passes through thin and hidden pores. As the blood flows up and down and is driven to the extremities of the body, so in the nature of blood an elementary substance distills through the narrow holes of stones and metals, from whence each part, through its own conduit, sucks in what is befitting its nature. If such a nutritious sap is less perceptible in them than in the stomach and veins of animals, let him remember, who requires this from nature, that a distinct element from the parts does not appear more in trees, whose anatomy, notwithstanding, has been executed by several. If one should say that in plants there are certain figures of a trunk, branches, leaves, blossoms, fruit, seeds, so also in these all this may be found, either analogous or in a different manner. And as plants themselves shrub not after the same way, why then should we admire, if things propagated under the earth meet with a different kind of life? The man who at any time observed innumerable gems, beautifully distinguished by various figures, to grow in certain places, there is no reason he should believe they were less actuated with life than the teeth and bones of animals. As every country is not productive in everything, in like manner, all stones and all plants grow not everywhere. Every place affords not a proper nourishment to every particular. Marble grows here, diamond there, one stone puts on its due form sooner, another stone later. This seed generates pebbles, that rocks. Stones receive an increase and decrease, are more or less durable, as well as other vegetative beings. But some are at a stand when they perceive no room for nourishment and increase through such hard bodies and such narrow pores. Who, say they, can believe that the vast bulks of stones and metals are nourished like bones and increase by vegetation? What nutritious force can soften and dilate that invincible hardness? But, to answer them by another question, what is admirable here, that we behold not also in the teeth of animals? They are harder than most stones and metals, notwithstanding they imbibe their element through minute and imperceptible conduits, and increase according to every dimension. Yet that teeth may receive the addition of a new substance, 'tis necessary that each part should be as firmly compacted and diffused into a larger bulk, which in like manner would be feasible if a tooth was equal to a mountain or island. If this is no matter of wonder with regard to bones, and the hardest trunks of trees, why, pray, should it seem next to a prodigy with regard to stones and metals? As growing trees and trees hewed down differ, so stones in quarries and stones hewed out of them. Those are alive, and these are dead. Those in their native beds are full of sap, there torn asunder are destitute of moisture, and at length are reduced to dust. In a word, everything in the earth is organic, and there is no equivocal generation, or without its own seed, of anything in nature. Wherefore it is not without reason that the earth should receive the appellation of Mother Panspermia, to whom the sun Pamastor is a never-decaying husband. And this justifies my answer to a German innkeeper, who impertinently importuned me to tell him what countryman I was. The sun is my father, the earth my mother, the world's my country, and all men are my relations. As if an ignorant and insipid person should accost me with this verse out of Homer: Who? From whence are you? Where is your city? Where was you born? 9. The Pantheists maintain the Pythagorean astronomy, more properly called the Egyptian, or to speak with the moderns, the Copernican, placing the sun in the centre of the planets that turn about it, among which our earth is neither the least nor the most inconsiderable. Like unto it there are other innumerable earths, making their revolutions in stated times, according to their respective distances about their own suns, or fixed stars, as they call them. The same they steadfastly hold to with regard to comets that describe the greatest circles. Good gods, whilst they devote themselves to the study of surveying the heavens and the earth, what an exquisite pleasure arises from the everlasting courses of wandering stars! In the contemplation of which they calculate both the velocity of the lesser and slowness of the greater, actuated with one and the same motion of nature. Hence they easily conclude that there are no real wanderings of the planets, that none of them retrogrades, none of them stands, none of them goes out of its right road, howsoever these particulars might appear to the eyes of men. They also know exactly in what sense ancient connoisseurs understood the music of the spheres. That so great and so sweet a sound, says Cicero, joined together by unequal rests, though in the exactest proportion, is the result of the impulse and motion of the orbs themselves, and mingling sharps with flats, constantly produces several harmonious concerts. The more ancient and wiser kind of philosophers understood this, not of a flat or sharp sound, not of the sevenfold division and agreement of tones, but of the wonderful harmony of these motions, whilst poets departing not from their art indulged their fancy, and whilst the monstrous forgers of solid spheres grew delirious, and as a punishment for their folly, in a manner heard the rapidity of the sound. How many and what agreeable problems are easily solved by the pupils of the Pantheists! As among other things, by what means the slowest star can get up to the quickest, which is not alleged here, as a thing difficult to be explained, but that, in a few words, I might give some hints of their doctrine, with regard to the coincidence of extremes, if I am allowed the term, seeing that, pursuant to the rules of their institutes, I am not allowed to lay open the whole. End of Section 2